Good afternoon. If everybody could please take a seat and be quiet. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of January 27th, 2016. I'm Mike Vaughn, I'm the chair, joined by my colleagues Mr. David Rue and Ms. Nuri Martinez. Thanks everybody for being here today. Let's start with the multimodal roll call. In the past couple weeks since our last T-Committee meeting, who has used the dash or a bus? Oh yeah, okay, very good. Train. Pedestrian. Everybody's a pedestrian at some point. Every hand should go up for that one. Bicycle. Okay, low on bicycle. Only Salita and Joe this week. Okay, thanks. So let's get started. We have a number of items for the consent calendar, but we have a number of speaker cards. Let me see, for the so for the regular meeting, Mr. Spindler, I'll give you 5 minutes for the whole lot of them. 2, 3, 4.
Okay. All right.
That covers the consent and the public comment.
No, the whole thing, okay. Yes, okay, public comment, yes. We got a very unpopular mobility plan in the city. The 30-year includes the blocking of Westwood and Paul Koretz, which is known in the community as Peppa Pig, is opposed to that extension in Westwood. And he wants that taken off of that mobility plan because of the traffic congestion. But every time you try to reduce congestion, you increase congestion. For example, over in the 405 freeway, they just finished the construction on the lane. Now you can't even get out of the valley until after 11 p.m. So in all of these items, you're not going to reduce vehicle traffic, you're not going to reduce anything until you build more roads. Cars use roads. People use cars. Therefore, you need more roads. And you have to build up. Like when I was up in San Francisco last year, why are there 2 levels on the bridge coming from Oakland, Alameda to the city of San Francisco? Because each level has traffic, and they also have trains, and they also have bike lanes. This is an example of a city that understands mobility plans. This is a place that understands how to do it right. But you guys haven't double-decked a goddamn thing. Why? Because you people don't understand that we're not going to get out of our cars, especially with all this cheap gas. I mean, gas is so cheap now, everybody can drive, and that's why you see more traffic. So the less that you have in cost of gas, the less in public ridership. Tomorrow at the MTA board, the numbers are way, way down. So your paradigm for reducing traffic is going to fail. And that's why these pedestrians and cyclists and vehicles, you have to have a car in LA. You know, like the song, driving in LA, no one walks in LA, because they don't walk in LA, they drive. And so we have these ridiculous things like the West Side Mobility Plan contract at number 4. Again, you have to talk to Paul Koretz. He doesn't want that as part of that 30-year plan, but you don't listen. Then we have Sustainable Strategies by the Southern California Association of Governments. Again, more needless bureaucracy. We need to double-deck the 101 and the 405. That's what you need to do. Then we're studying the current and future needs of the city's automated traffic surveillance and control system. Well, on item 5, you have to go to the police commission and study the fact that people are against surveillance of ordinary citizens by Chief Charlie Beck. And that's what they do. They take down license plate numbers and then they run information, and that is a violation of your First, Fourth, and Eighth Amendment rights. And then we have item 6, something called the ATSAC system. Well, nobody really knows. Well, the maker of the motion was David, so I guess he knows what Atsac is, and he'll talk more about that. Then we have this granting $363,000 to implement a 6-month subsidy program to allow Metro holders to ride free in dash buses. Well, everybody likes free. Everything's free. Except the problem is, like Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money to spend. Nothing's free unless you can get a way to print money. And only the federal government can print money. That's why they're over there on Spring Street in the grand jury, because they can print money and they can investigate and they can do everything. In a city, in a municipal government, you have limited funds. So again, we should not be passing these things. Take all of these items, get rid of them, and put the money to double-decking the 405 and the 101, and we will all be better.
Thank you. Mr. Spindler, you can stay there for just a second. I'm going to recommend items 2, 3, 4, and 7 on consent. Or any objection? All right, those items are approved. I'm going to temporarily recess the regular meeting and convene the special meeting. And we have 2 items for the special meeting. We've got some speaker cards. Mr. Spindler, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, moving along quickly. And that's what we need to do. We need to get things going quicker. Oversized vehicle restrictions. Okay, what is that? It's those lovely campers you see all over the city with people living in them. They're living in mobile homes on the street because they're homeless, but they're not vehicleless. So this is the wave of the future. Who knows who in this room could wind up living in an RV down by the LA River? I mean, you know, you could bring Chris Farley back and have a good joke on that one if he was back from the dead, right? You don't want to be living down by the river in your RV. Well, a lot of people do live in their RVs. And the way to get around the Ninth Circuit, the way to get around civil rights laws is to restrict the size of the vehicles parked. And I think that some civil rights attorneys should challenge these in court as being an undue restrictive measure simply designed against homelessness. You have a right to be homeless. You can be homeless, and you should be able to live in an RV on the street, and you should be able to park there anytime you want. Now, the problem is that all the NIMBY asshole homeowners that are out there, they don't want it in their neighborhood because they want their houses and their little white picket fences with their poodle. Yes, coming home, and as they come home, wagging their little tails, right? While the city around them falls apart into pieces. This city is crumbling. This city is collapsing because this city is ran by people that don't know what they're doing. So you're doing too many of these restrictions. It will result in a class action and will be vacated.
Thank you. So colleagues, for the special, I'm going to recommend item number 1 just be moved on consent. Are there any objections? Okay. Thank you very much. In the special, we'll go to item number 2.
Item number 2, Department of City Planning Report relative to specific tasks to be undertaken by the city in anticipation of the state's adoption of amended California Environmental Quality Act guidelines in connection with Senate Bill 743 and related matters.
Thank you. And while staff comes up, let me just sort of preface this for my colleagues a bit. Colleagues, before either of you were on Transportation Committee, the state passed Senate Bill 743, which effectively is going to change how we calculate the traffic impact from developments that we approve. It moves us from a system of level of service, which effectively measures as the determining metric how fast a car can move through an intersection. With SB 743, it changes the predominant metric to the impact on greenhouse gas emissions and has us think very differently about how we do traffic, how we measure traffic, how we mitigate traffic, and the types of projects we can approve. That legislation is going to be going into effect, and the city has obligations to do an enabling ordinance to determine how we're going to put that into place. It can be a bit of a wonky discussion, so I'll leave it to my colleagues to determine how deep you'd like to go on it. The department's going to be submitting written comments soon, I believe, and you're here to give us a bit of a preview.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Councilman. David Summers, Department of City Planning. I work with the citywide section. And, as you mentioned, this is a really big transition, actually, for us in a regulatory standpoint of how we implement the California Environmental Quality Act. Senate Bill 743 set direction that level of service is not really an adequate measure to determine transportation impacts under CEQA, primarily because it's not clearly linked with generation of greenhouse gas emissions, and it many times can conflict depending on how you're solving congestion problems with the state goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they set out us on a path to figure out what metrics should we applying to measure the performance of our transportation system so that it is in line with our sustainability goals of how we can grow as a city and accomplish all the other things that we want to do from a sense of livable communities and just creating the types of communities that we want to see in the future. And so we want to ensure that our development, that our regulatory framework is in sync with our goals and objectives as a city of how and that will be growing. So we did anticipate these changes. Department of Transportation and City Planning have both been actively engaged at the state effort to both through the legislative process to understand, what was kind of in the works and understanding that, when this direction was underway that we can adequately respond to it. So we applied for a grant through and were awarded almost $500,000 grant through the Strategic Growth Council, and for the specific purpose to update our regulatory framework and be able to measure vehicle miles traveled as a methodology to review both land use and transportation projects. And so we initiated this work program back in April. We hired consultants, Fair and Peers. The first couple tasks that they've been actively underway is updating our travel demand model so that it's sensitive to VMT effects and selecting the best sketch model tool that we'll be able to use when we're evaluating land use projects and transportation projects. So those tasks are currently underway. Future tasks soon to be in development will be collection of trip generation rates. For the first time in the city, we'll actually have trip generation data specifically for affordable housing projects. Why do we focus on affordable housing? Because we want to ensure as we set this on a path of sustainability that we also keep equity in the forefront in the discussion and ensure that there isn't any unintended consequences so that if new projects are coming in, they're adequately assessed as to their transportation characteristics of the people that live there. We do have data from other sources that demonstrates that people that live in affordable housing tend to use transit more and drive less, and so we want to document that in our regulatory review process. So we have Fair and Peers looking into collecting trip generation rates. I know that there are people in the community that are excited about that because we typically rely on, in the past, rates that have been collected through cities all across the country in the past 20 or 30 some odd years, and so sometimes it's a question of how well that actually conveys the built environment. So we're going to be better at that. Also, we're going to be able to quantify the benefits of transportation demand management measures. So what do we do if a project actually does maybe exceed what we determine to be a threshold of a VMT impact, that we have adequate tools that are defensible. If we apply to a project that we'll be able to enforce and monitor and understand, and that is likely going to be an evolving methodology as we are able to implement this. And so, yeah, Jay.
If I may, Jacob from DOT, I'd like to add that as we kind of progress forward, probably one of the things that's going to be very much questionable would be the public confidence and the switch from LOS to VMT. And I think what we want to do is create a kind of a system where we have a kind of a feedback loop, and it should be data-driven. So as we make these changes, we should really measure how effective they are and come back and actually adjust those rates. And I think only if we can do that, I think we can gain the public confidence. Without that type of monitoring and enforcement, I think we'll always be questioned as to the technical underpinnings of this method.
So I'm trying to put myself in the position of someone who, for whatever reason, may be listening to this on council phone or maybe listening to it later, and it's probably not very understandable, just because we're talking acronyms, VMT and LOS.
That's right.
And impacts and levels of significance. So I just want to see if I can translate this into sort of common language. Right now, when there's a development proposed, DOT does a traffic analysis, or the developer does a traffic analysis through the EIR with DOT, and they basically come back and say, this project will have no impact on traffic, or this project will have an impact on these 7 intersections. And then we give them, as part of the approval process, things to do to mitigate that if it's mitigatable. Maybe do a left turn pocket, or some neighborhood traffic calming, or whatever, variety of things. What does this do instead of measuring the impact on 7 intersections? How is this different?
So instead of measuring the impacts at an intersection, looking at the congestion level for cars, you're really trying to reduce the VMT, which is a proxy for air quality reductions, right? That's our ultimate goal. So basically, we're moving away from doing physical improvements to really trying to get people out of their cars, into transit, into bikes, car share. So I see the shared mobility and the connecting that with public transportation, tying the parking, all these things that actually give people reason why they may do something other than bring their car. And I think that's the kind of the future direction of the mobility solutions that we'll sort of pursue rather than traditional widenings and signal improvements.
But on a very simple level, I'm trying to keep this simple for me to understand, is how do you determine or predict what the impact will be of a project on greenhouse gas emissions?
So the OPR just released a revised set of guidelines, and you have to first set the threshold, right? You have to first have a definition of what causes what constitutes an impact. They're giving some guidance, and what they're saying is that if you were to measure your regional average VMT, that's probably the is it a SCAG area or Metro? I'm not too sure.
That would be from the MPO, so SCAG would be the...
So you would measure that, and you would develop certain kinds of, thresholds and say if you're above or below, it would cause an impact or not, right? So that's sort of our guiding target line, if you will.
What's the measurement?
So VMT stands for vehicle miles traveled.
But what do you... So how
you have an average vehicle miles traveled profile, right, for the county, for example. You can sort of measure that and estimate that. So if your project comes in and you ran the VMT calculation tool, you will get a certain generation profile. So if that is, let's say, above the average regional VMT, you would be in a situation where you have an impact. If you're below, that means that your project is not big enough, or it's not sizable enough to cause that kind of impact.
So if it's a Target superstore, you make an assumption that people are driving a further distance than if it's a neighborhood fruit stand.
Yeah, so the distance also comes into play. So if you have a local neighborhood target versus something else, right? If they, let's say it was a very retail-starved area, and you brought in some like a small local neighborhood type of target, you may actually be able to demonstrate that even though you're bringing trips, the other trips that were there before going to further away retail stores, the distances are reduced. So there's kind of a combination of not only the trip generation, but the distance of those travel trips, because the vehicle mile traveled is a combination of the actual trips that are generated times the actual distance. Does that make sense? Is it a little bit? Okay.
So if a project is having a lot of 3-mile trips to it, presumably it generates a smaller amount of greenhouse gas emissions than a project that has a bunch of
Longer trips.
40-mile trips.
Yes.
How, though, do we, in evaluating this, factor in the fact that a 40-mile trip with no congestion, I imagine, is probably going to produce less greenhouse gas problems than a 5-mile trip where you're at a standstill the entire time?
So that's part of the reason why we're developing this modeling tool. It's to really to gauge those subtle differences, right? Because like you indicated, it is different for free-flowing, fast-moving traffic, even if it's a longer distance, versus something that's caught in traffic, even if it's a shorter distance. And the modeling will have all those built-in assumption tools to be able to tweak for those subtle differences. And so it will generate a different, kind of profile.
Another way to look at this too is what we're currently not seeing for projects that are at the periphery where you have longer distance trips that are generated. You could have really great capacity on those streets. Think of like the North Valley, where they were developed later on, and they were able to actually build out to their designation standards, very very wide curb to curb dimensions, plenty of free-flowing traffic. But you could have a lot of projects that were built in this area where they're actually contributing perhaps more to the regional travel demand, and actually contributing to like freeway congestion and local congestion, rather than the incremental development projects that are more in an infill location that have plenty of urban services and projects that are close by to them. So in essence, it kind of captures what was normally of invisible externality in the development review process.
Will level of service still be a metric we use in some situations?
Not as under CEQA as a significant impact, criteria, but it may, and we're still debating that, utility of LOS in certain kind of situations. One example might be that if you wanted to figure out inside the actual project, if they had a big venue and they needed to kind of like line up the cars or get in quick, the in and out of a particular project, the LOS metric still might give you some insight as to what is the proper sizing of those lanes, right, within the project, or maybe immediately adjacent. So from a access perspective, it may still be useful. So another example might be that you look at the left turn pocket at the immediate intersection. Perhaps through the LOS, you might decide that it may need to be lengthened, not the street widened, but just the length of the pocket, for example, could be lengthened because you expect more demand. So you might be able to tweak some operational things using LOS. So it may still be practical in that approach.
Okay. And we will have different metrics for residential, commercial, mixed use, I presume?
There will be the metric that would be applicable. So VMT is usually taken with a denominator. So VMT per capita, per population, or per employee. So it would be dependent on the land use, the type of land use proposal, development proposal, and what would it include as far as how we would capture the VMT impacts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last question before I turn it over to my colleagues. You mentioned the trip generation data. One of the things that's always bothered me about planning in Los Angeles is we do these studies predicting that this is what this project will cause, and we attach mitigations based on that. And then I don't know that we ever go back and actually measure or figure out a way to determine if our formula was right and if the traffic impacts are worse, and if they are worse, do anything about it. Does this provide a mechanism to actually do that?
Yes, we want to correct that situation, and our plan forward is really to have a monitoring and enforcement mechanism by which, when we make certain assumptions about what they generate, and we impose certain kinds of mitigations, we want to go back and actually measure, how much they're generating, whether they're meeting their targets or not, and we want to use that real-time data and bring it back so that next time, if we're going to, apply a certain kind of VMT generation profile, we would know through that experience. We'll have this continuous feedback loop where we're going to require the developers to actually, constantly submit real-time data to us so that we can, truly evaluate our assumptions, and over time, we should be able to refine and actually, get very accurate profiles of, what the VMT generation might be for different kinds of projects. Whereas right now, like you indicated, under the LOS scenario, we take a slice, one-time snapshot, and we use it forever, and we don't go back and verify, and we don't add new data to really update those rates. But what we're envisioning is really to create this mechanism by which they're required to report, and we will go back and constantly update and adjust.
Mr. Roof, any questions?
Since this contract was executed almost a year ago, what preliminary work have you completed?
They have been able to update our travel demand forecasting model. So that was necessary in order to have a model that was sensitive to VMT. So we had to synchronize that with SCAG when their latest data was available for the new regional transportation plan, and that just became available later on in late fall. So we really couldn't complete the update of our model before we had access to that data. Also, we've been working with HSID and identifying affordable housing sites that we'll be looking to use as a source for our trip collection. So we are going to be collecting that data this spring, and we've been using that time just to come up with a methodology for site selection.
Are you on track to complete the work by the fall of 2016?
Well, the work program would be, our schedule would likely go into 2017. I think that we'll likely have recommended thresholds developed by the fall. So we would be coming back to this body to review those and look what our recommendations are.
Are you going to need additional funds to complete the work program?
We will need additional funds. Well, we have the $500,000 grant from the Strategic Growth Council, but as you know, the way that we process grant payments is that we have to request advance funding in order to get actually reimbursed from the granting agency. So we do need to have the final allocation. We've come back in phases, and so we need to have the final allocation in order for the consultants even to proceed with that work. So they won't be able to really come up with any threshold recommendations or some of the other scope items that are critical to meeting that time period without us authorizing that third and final funding in advance.
Additional money besides the 497.
It's part of the 497.
So
yeah.
You won't have enough with the grant.
Yes, we need the third. We need this third authorization to cover us for the advance funding that we've been already grant reimbursed for.
You're not going to need additional money aside from the grants.
Well, we are. We've also allocated, I think, $300,000 for Measure R to cover the balance. So the Strategic Growth Council actually doesn't cover the complete work programs, but we're able to balance the remaining of it through the Measure allocation. It's not. What's that?
That'll be enough to complete the
It
work.
will be enough. Yes, that's right.
Do you have? This is my last question, Mr. Chair. Do you have a sense as to where the state is going in terms of the changes in CEQA? Do you have any sense?
Well, they've just, as we were just submitting our staff report, they actually released their the Office of Planning and Research released their latest guidelines, and we're just kind of going through those now just to see. I mean, we've done a preliminary read that looks like they're on track with what the recommendations were before, but there is a sense in the direction that they're going.
That's it, thanks.
Just two quick questions. So based on the work program, so you've started the outreach and all that already, or you're planning? Where are you on that phase right now?
Yeah, so we've been mostly collaborating with other technical advisors. So Trip Generation Task, we've reached out to actual affordable housing providers and HSID and other agencies just to kind of firm up our methodology. I mean, this is largely a technical exercise, so we just want to make sure that everything that we're doing is reasonable within everybody's domain of expertise. But we do have an outreach component to this. We have tasked consultants to do training and some engagement, as we go into the mode of actually recommending what threshold approach that we'll be taking. So that will be a little later on in the process. We just haven't really developed. We're not at that stage where we've developed any kind of recommendation. So there really isn't been anything to come to the, any outside bodies or community with.
So, Mr. Chair, so they'll be coming back to us.
Yes,
again,
it will.
right?
It'll be back in September, I believe.
Yeah, we should be back in the fall. Yeah.
So one thing I want to underscore is the need to communicate this differently. Internally, I know that this is very technical, and what we have to do is provide technical comments and come up with the way we're going to do things. But the way this is going to impact folks isn't going to be at all technical. It's going to be real and it's going to be profound. And I think we have to do a better job as a city in communicating to folks what's being considered, why it's being considered, and what real impact it will have. So I'm going to ask Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Bertoni, when he's confirmed, to give some thinking about how do we really communicate this better. It's not to take away at all from the brilliant technical work you're doing, but there's a messaging component of this that we need to be thinking about, particularly as we explain this to our neighborhood councils and others who are involved in planning and transportation.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And that was kind of where I was getting at. The outreach component, I'd really like to hear more about that later, and especially when you guys are planning to help calculate the new VMT for future CEQA analysis, it's getting different folks involved because we want them an opportunity to get engaged earlier, because at the end, it's going to affect them, and then they're going to come to us.
So when we come back in September, I'd like to see an outreach and a communications strategy from both planning and DOT on how to do this. Okay.
Will do.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So we're going to continue this matter, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Thank you.
Very good.
I always check with my staff before I say that. All right, so that concludes the special meeting. Thank you both, gentlemen. And we will now reopen the regular meeting. And we will go right to Ms. Reynolds and her monthly employee recognition. But while she's coming up, let me just make a chairman's comment for a bit. I know that one of the public comment speakers referenced a LA Times story the other day that talked about the declining ridership on Metro. I just want to point out that there was some real skewed math in that analysis. If you look at Metro ridership from 2006 to now, yes, there's been a decline in ridership. But if you look at the ridership from 2 years earlier, from 2004 to now, there's been a 20% increase. So it really depends on how you decide to construct your formulas. And Metro ridership on the whole over the past decade is up significantly. And we're doing a lot of work to build out the network, which gives folks more ridership opportunities. So I just wanted to actually put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to, as I get started on the staff recognition, just thank everyone for their patience through a fascinating but very wonky policy discussion to get to the recognition. Really appreciate everybody coming to support their colleagues. So we're going to recognize a couple of folks from LADOT, one of whom there's they're both very special, but one in particular I think you'll find really interesting. So first, and just stand when I call your name, I want to recognize Signal System Electrician Jonathan Patton from our operations group. John started with LADOT in 1999 and has proven to be one of those special individuals that lead and take the initiative to learn and to figure out how to resolve problems. He finds a solution. He regularly shares his knowledge to ensure coverage of key functions in his division. He has been working on the battery backup systems, where he trained himself and has voluntarily taken on the task of inspecting several battery backup systems to protect signal intersection operation in the event of power failure. And I think in particular in this El Nino season, there will be more than once where we will all feel very grateful for his help. He's been the sole trainer in the Central Yard for new employees for several years. Again, a job he took on his own and formalized by creating a training system in the yard from salvage materials so that new employees and others can test their knowledge of programming and troubleshooting techniques in a controlled environment. Another example of taking things on, he almost single-handedly cleaned and organized the Central Yard shop and traffic head supply area. This has improved efficiencies in managing supplies and provided an inventory that can be easily accessed by staff. John is a dedicated worker and proud of what he does. I know that his colleagues and his supervisors feel like he's somebody that really takes care of them. He's determined, focused, exceptionally well organized, and above all, an outstanding performer. Thank you so much for your service, John. So second, I want to recognize Traffic Officer Monique Brown of Parking Enforcement and Traffic Control for her excellence in public service. Officer Brown is a 26-year veteran and has demonstrated professionalism and a conscientious approach to her duties. I want to recognize her extraordinary actions on January 8, 2016, while on regular patrol in the northeast area of Los Angeles. Officer Brown was approached by a citizen who reported that his older father was missing. He stated that his dad was a 91-year-old military vet who suffered from dementia and was last seen 2 days earlier when he left the family car headed to East LA. Officer Brown got a copy of the missing person flyer from the citizen and reassured him that she and her fellow officers would be keeping an eye out for his dad. Later that day, while watching the evening news, Officer Brown saw the broadcast announcing this critical missing person. The following day, while patrolling in the Rampart area, Officer Brown observed a silver Honda described in the flyer that was unattended and parked near a fire hydrant. While investigating, she was approached by an older man whom she immediately recognized was the missing dad. Upon further questioning, his identity was confirmed, and she immediately requested that PD respond to her location. Shortly after, officers arrived and were briefed on the circumstances of her discovery. Officer Brown says, "I love my job, but at times it could be a difficult and thankless job. On this day, it was different. It didn't matter that there was no one to recognize what happened. As I was driving away, I was just so very pleased and excited that this missing person was going home and reunited with his family. LADOT family is very proud of Officer Brown, and today we are honored to recognize her outstanding performance and dedication to the residents of LA." So that's all I have for the recognition. Thank you very much.
Jonathan and Monique. Colleagues, any questions for the General Manager while she's here? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to our first of two Atsac items. First one is item number 5.
Item number 5, motion Englander, Bonin, Buscaino, relative to instructing the City Administrative Officer, Chief Legislative Analyst, and the LADOT to study the current and future needs of the city's automated traffic surveillance and control system and report with recommendations on necessary traffic system upgrades and improvements.
Good afternoon, Dan. Good to see you.
Good afternoon.
Let me just sort of set this one up just a little bit. Atsac is a vital part of the city of Los Angeles. Proud to say that it's a homegrown system. In fact, Ms. Reynolds could have brought in Sean, is it Skihan? For recognition, because he's the guy who started this, and it's a great system. But if Atsac is the brain and the nerve center of our traffic system in Los Angeles, it's got a cracked skull. The Atsac headquarters is disgusting, really. I've been down there. It's cramped. There's leaks. There are mainframes that are sort of dodging water coming down when it rains and stuff like that. It's just not a good circumstance. And it is in, where is it, Dan? In the basement of City Hall East, yes? Yeah. And it's just not in good shape. So one of the questions that is sort of before the city is, how do we fix it? Where do we put it? There's a number of different options, and what the cost will be. And that's what you're sort of going to outline for us today.
Yes, thank you very much for setting that up, Councilmember. Dan Mitchell, with Assistant General Manager with the Department of Transportation. So the first of the two motions really addresses taking care of Atsac and supporting the investment that we've made there. Both Atsac, the place, and the infrastructure that connects all of our traffic signals with this nerve center that's currently in City Hall East. So about Atsac, the place, we have been working very closely with our partners at the CAO's office, the CLA's office, as well as the mayor's office to look at, and the Bureau of Engineering, to look at other opportunities for where we might be able to locate Atsac, or whether we improve it in its current location. The department's preferred option is to relocate it with our main headquarters office at the Caltrans building, and that's something that we are pursuing now. It appears feasible, and so we're going to be bringing that to the Municipal Facilities Committee and moving forward in that process. If so, that's something that we could have done by 2017, so by the end of next year. So that's something that we're working toward. And then as far as Atsac, the system, there are a number of elements to that system. There's certainly the connection between the traffic signals and the nerve center. And as we've continued to expand and build out the traffic signals, we have had a need to increase the communication capacity and also build in to incorporate resilience into that so that it's more reliable. We currently have approximately $10 million in grant-funded projects to help build that capacity and reinforce it. In addition, we also have a camera system that started with just a handful of cameras and now is up to about 600 cameras throughout the city. But that as well has been built over the course of 30 years and needs some additional attention. So we have a $2 million grant from Metro to improve that, to upgrade it to a digital system, a cloud-based system. But it's something we're looking to see if we can advance that funding so that we can get that done sooner. We are also upgrading some of our oldest cameras as part of the full build-out of our adaptive capabilities that we're also doing. So we have a number of projects that are wrapping up the addition of all the detectors we need and so forth in order to have the full capabilities with our traffic signal system. That design will be done by June of this year and with construction complete by the end of 2017. So that will also upgrade some of our cameras and some of our changeable message signs that we have out there. So I think that's a comprehensive update on where we are with the system. We will put that into a report back, but that's the early preview of what we're going to share.
When you were mentioning the possibility of moving over to Caltrans, I thought Mr. Hirano, standing in the back, was going to yell, "Your Honor, I object, I object." I know that there's concerns from the CAO's office about moving into Caltrans, and they would prefer to be housed in a city building. I understand the CAO and DOT are meeting together pretty regularly and are trying to work out something, yeah?
Yes, that is something that we are working toward and working through those concerns.
David Hirano from the Office of CAO. Mr. Chairman, for the record, we don't object to that yet. We're still in the process of evaluating. Realistically, it's an option that's on the table and it's being evaluated. We understand the department is very desirous of that option, and we have not finished the evaluation of that option. So there are other options being evaluated. When we have a recommendation that our two departments can agree on, we will approach the Municipal Facilities Committee and this council and ask for the resources to move ahead.
So when you say we don't object yet, you're not locking yourselves into objecting at a future date?
Correct. I mean, we have honestly not finished the evaluation on that site. So it would be premature for us to have a position of objection yet on that.
Sure. What are our options for the non-Caltrans if we did it at a city-owned?
They would be, at this point, reinforcing the location there as part of a comprehensive upgrade of that P4 level. When Atsac was first placed there, it was the emergency operating center for the city. We had 911 there, both fire and police. We had the city's dispatch center for city services. It was a fantastic place to be co-located to get to manage the city. And over time, they have each outgrown that location, and we have as well. But there are still opportunities to expand in that floor if our preferred option doesn't work out.
I guess part of your argument would be that if you can't be co-located with the Emergency Operations Command Center, it makes sense to be co-located with Department of Transportation, which is one of the arguments for being Caltrans.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Happy to help out. So the cameras you talked about, how many cameras are being upgraded?
I don't have the number about how many are being upgraded as part of that project. As we move throughout the different areas of the city, we're filling in some of the areas that weren't built with cameras as part of that, specifically in the downtown area. When that was the second system that was built, we only had a handful of cameras at that time. So we're filling in those areas and other areas that need them. But there are ongoing maintenance needs that we would like to be more proactive in planning for. That's something that my friend Mr. Hirano has been encouraging us to do. So we've been developing a maintenance plan for Atsac. It is in final draft form, and we anticipate sharing that with this committee when we report back.
Which will be in about 60 days?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
You know, how much square footage are you talking about? And I know in the past, I guess Councilmember Englander proposed asked if you could go to the new EOC center, and you said that was too small? There's no way.
It is too small. There was a comprehensive analysis that the Bureau of Engineering did in cooperation with the CAO's office, and the needs there, both current and future, extend beyond what was available in that site. In fact, it isn't large enough to even address what we currently have, and I think that if I may, Councilmember Englander's perspective is that now that we're in a new world, we can move a lot of the equipment that we have into the cloud, and so we would need a smaller footprint. And that is true for our camera system, and that's what we're pursuing. The servers that run our traffic signal system need to be in a secure facility, isolated from the cloud, if you will, for security reasons. So that was the issue
That was
there.
going to be my second. Going into the future, especially advances in technology, can we go to a smaller space? But
A lot of the space that's required isn't so much for computing needs or storage needs, like we think of the cloud being used, but it's actually for the physical connections that have to happen between the field equipment and our computers. But we are always thinking about new ways to make those connections to be more efficient, which may be part of our next item's discussion.
Ms. Martinez?
No, I have some questions on 6.
Okay. All right, so we'll look at that report in about 60 days. I want to make sure that it highlights the issues around locating Atsac in a city-owned facility versus a city-leased facility, the advantages and disadvantages of both. I'd also like to report on other resource needs like the full build-out of the system, as you mentioned, building resiliency in the communication system, and an upgrade of the camera system to a digital system, and of course, funding for all of that. Okay, thanks very much. We'll report back in 60 days, so continue. Okay, item number 6, which is what I like to refer to as Atsac 3.0. It's how do we sort of expand on Atsac, bring it into the future, and allow it to be used for a range of purposes that can make life in Los Angeles and its neighborhoods better. So,
Thank you. So where item number 5 was about Atsac, the place, and the system and the physical connections, here we're talking about moving Atsac into the future, this Atsac 3.0 that's really leveraging this investment into new opportunities and new applications as technology advances. There are a number of bulleted items here, and I'll pick a few to discuss. The first is about expansion of the vehicle preemption system to possibly reduce emergency response times. And that's a great example of how we can leverage our existing infrastructure for new applications. So all of our transit priority routes that we have, the transit priority system is one that we built with Metro as partners, and we have those transit priority routes equipped with the ability to preempt the signal, which would be to immediately go to a green in the particular direction for emergency vehicles, the fire and ambulance, when those vehicles are equipped with a special transponder, the same transponder that the Metro rapid buses use. The system is programmed so it can identify those as, instead of a late bus or an early bus, as an emergency vehicle. And all we need to do is to equip more of those fire engines and emergency vehicles with those transponders, and work more closely with the fire department to ensure that as they rotate their equipment around, that the stations near these transit priority routes have that equipment. So that's a good example of how we can take our investment and, for a relatively small amount, address new applications. As far as preparing for the future with connected and autonomous vehicles, we are in the process of developing a technology strategy, transportation technology strategy that will address this in particular. So we'll have more to report back on when we report back. And the comprehensive planning tool, the real-time incident detection system are both applications that build on our technology to use the data in new ways. That's something that we're in the process of developing a scope for and a budget. In both of those cases, we had some preliminary work that was done, and during lean budget times, we needed to step away from that. But here's an opportunity to resurrect those projects and apply them, make them applicable now. The last was about how we can enhance safety features to realize our Vision Zero goals. And so we're in the process right now of a comprehensive safety assessment of our streets, looking at the high injury network that I think you've heard about, to identify where we should be investing and what sort of tools we should use. And part of those tie into Atsac, including the leading pedestrian interval or pedestrian head start signal timing that we've done, looking at how we can protect turns from pedestrian phases, either left turn or right turn phases, and retiming our traffic signals to be more pedestrian friendly and accommodate the aging population and come up to speed with existing regulations or new regulations that we have. And then updating our Atsac website. We've recently refreshed that, but we're looking for more partnership opportunities where in the late 90s, when we were a pioneer in presenting our traffic data on a web page, that's now very common. And so our opportunity is best left to partnering with other companies that can help present that information using our data. And then the last was the public mobile app, which you may have heard. There was a launch this morning with a new app called GoLA that brings together multiple modes of transportation into one app so that folks can find the best way to get from place A to B.
And the GoLA app, although I wasn't at the press conference, the mayor just showed it to me a few minutes ago, gives you the opportunity to plot a route and determine which is best for you under 3 different scenarios. You can do it for fastest, you can do it for cheapest, and you can do it for greenest, which is actually pretty cool. So hopefully we can spend some time promoting that. So glad to hear that you're working on this report. It sounds like you're going in the direction that I had hoped when I submitted the motion. I've been very impressed that we were the lead in doing Atsac, that this was sort of born in Los Angeles. And I've been impressed that it's been such a resilient technology, that it has sort of kept up with the times. And I'm eager to see us sort of step into the next generation of what we can do. And I think you outlined a number of exciting aspects of what can be done. We have this nerve center, and we have all these eyes out there, and it can tell us a lot of useful information so that we can make traffic flow better, so that we can improve safety for people who are walking or cycling, and that we can share information with other city agencies more effectively. When you were mentioning the data on the website, I just wanted to see if I understand where you were going on that. Is that sort of an open data portal so that independent software or app developers can come up with other tools that can improve things even more?
Not exactly. We do provide our data through a portal in cooperation with Metro and their RIT system. But when I was talking about our Atsac website, what I was talking about was transitioning from a website where we're presenting our information exclusively on a map to one where we're partnering with a company that already gets data from multiple sources and could include our data as one more reliable component to show what's happening on our city streets. But we no longer have to develop our own maps and be a leader in that realm because that's a pretty well-developed industry.
Is there any capability, and I'm not sure what the useful application of this would be, but is there any potential for the website to be able to allow people to see real time at different intersections?
I'm sorry, the door is closing. Real time?
Yeah, real time a look at certain intersections.
Oh, a video feed?
Yeah.
Well,
that would be data heavy, so it would be expensive, but I'm just curious.
The technology exists. There are some cities that provide that, and Caltrans actually on the freeway cameras has a way of presenting select cameras and images. One thing that so right now we have a limitation of how our data or how our video images are brought back and where they can be shown. But by upgrading to a new digital system, we're looking of freeing our hands from a limited number of outputs that can be shown and widening that so that it can be available certainly throughout our department so that we can leverage those insights through our various divisions. But ultimately, it's possible to show select cameras through that website for the public, or even distribute those images. They might be still images, every so many minutes. Right. The way that kind of information is shown, but that is a possibility.
Is Atsac currently? What applications does Atsac currently have to help promote or protect pedestrian safety? Any?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Currently, what applications does Atsac have to protect pedestrian safety now?
Primarily, that would be through traffic signals for pedestrian signals. And we have, at every signalized intersection, we have all of our pedestrian movements that have signals, and we're in the process of retiming those so that the speeds used to calculate the required time is a little bit slower than it was traditionally, so that we help improve safety. And the other component would be the leading pedestrian interval, where we provide a head start for pedestrians. The walk comes before the green light for the vehicles, so the pedestrians can establish themselves in the intersection and be more visible prior to drivers being released into the intersection. But aside from ensuring that our traffic signals work well, including our pedestrian crossing traffic signals that we have, as signalized crosswalks, that's pretty much the extent of how Atsac plays a part in ensuring pedestrian safety at this time.
What level of integration do we have, if any, between Atsac and Caltrans and the freeways?
At this point, that interaction is primarily just verbal communication. We don't have integrated systems with Caltrans. That's something that we've explored in the past, having interagency systems. And it's something that Caltrans is now pursuing in a new generation as part of a connected corridors project that they're working on the 210 freeway in the San Gabriel Valley and also in the South Bay area that includes the city of Los Angeles. So the potential application there is that by better sharing information when there's a problem on the freeway that spills out on the surface streets, that the system could automatically identify new routes and communicate those.
Well, that's where I'm going, because one of my traffic choke points, sort of on the border of my shared border with Mr. Koretz, is Sunset near the 405. And part of the dynamic, I assume, is that we have a system that is designed to make traffic on Sunset flow as quickly as possible, which most people would say isn't very quick. But part of the reason it isn't so quick is that we're forced up against the competing demand of Caltrans trying to regulate the flow onto the freeway. So we're sort of forced into that logjam. And I wonder if, I don't know, but I wonder if better communication, integration between a Caltrans system would help that in any way.
There certainly is that potential to run. So far, our interaction with the ramp metering system and the traffic signal system in recent times has been strictly on a agency-to-agency basis where we explain we have a challenge and they look into it, and we have a challenge, we look into that. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we, unlike most agencies, we have a cooperative agreement with Caltrans to operate all of their ramp on and off-ramp traffic signals. So we do coordinate them, but not the ramp meters.
Okay. All right, something to pursue separately, I guess. Mr. Kretz, any questions?
Yeah, a couple, but first, if I could take a point of personal privilege, and what passed in the council today was a number of preferential parking districts, and I wanted to thank Michelle Caton and Tamara Martin and Pierre Gent and everybody else, Salita, for your involvement in all of that. It was desperately needed, and I thank you all for making that happen. My only question about Atsac and our syncing process is that we have all these signals, and they say that they're synced, and you can definitely tell when it works and when it doesn't. Every once in a while, you'll hit an area where everything is perfectly synced, and it turns, if you're not speeding, you're going just the right speed, everything turns green as you get there, and you get pretty quickly to your destination. And yet there are other streets that are marked sync, but they don't really seem to move any faster than they used to. So what's the difference between the ones that work and the ones that don't? And sometimes you're on the same street at the same time, and the next day everything works perfectly, and then suddenly it doesn't. So what's the connection to Atsac, and why does it seem to work perfectly at times and then not at other times?
I think in a succinct way, the best way I can explain that your experience is that different times of day, there are different priority movements depending on the peak direction of travel. And even on the same street at different times of the day, there may be different directions that are favored. And if you're traveling in that direction, you might experience a wave of green lights, and in the other direction, not. There are certain compromises that we have to make in how we time the traffic signals to balance the demands in multiple directions, and it's just not physically possible, given the rules of time and space, to coordinate the traffic signals green, northbound and southbound, and then east and west, and all the cross streets that they intersect. However, we do our best to balance the competing demands to minimize the delays while in the framework of providing safe operation. The other element that so in short, it's the time of day and the direction you happen to be going on that street. The other is that we have an adaptive system that operates in certain areas, and so it is responding in real time to the demands of those intersections and adjusting the amount of green time that's given to the different movements in response to those demands. It can also grow the cycle length, the length of time that it takes to cycle through all the indications in order to provide more efficient movement. So what that means is as it's responding, if there's a certain different travel pattern that's happening one day versus the next, you may experience them operating in a different fashion. And it may not be optimal for the direction you're traveling in, but it may be optimal in minimizing the overall delays, congestion, and environmental impacts of idling cars.
And I probably helped to make it more difficult because I have advocated in certain locations for a few extra seconds for pedestrians, et cetera, and that may increase safety and disrupt movement at the same time.
Well, that is a challenge that we are facing. Safety is of paramount importance, and as we revisit the signal timing, we find that we have to lengthen those pedestrian phases to provide more time for folks to cross safely. And as a result, when you add up all of those minimum times, now we don't fit in coordination with the other nearby signals, and we have to run an operation that's out of sync with those. And so that takes time to reevaluate all the different signals in the neighborhood until we can get them back coordinated.
Now, does Atsac help you automatically do that, or you have to re-engineer it?
The initial calculations need to be done by hand by a transportation engineer that measures those distances, that evaluates all the criteria to design the timing. Then within that framework, the Atsac system can adjust timing, sometimes grow and change the coordination, the relationship between the signals. So that can help us in the interim, but ultimately we need to reevaluate the timing at every intersection.
Very good. Thank you.
Ms. Martinez?
You might have already answered this during your presentation, but have you done a study of what features may improve the system's experience for the staff and the public?
We have not done a study specifically as a survey, but we did have the Texas Transportation Institute come a couple of years ago and evaluate the operation of Atsac and the benefits, and it did identify the unique benefits to the Atsac system to the public. I don't have that information in front of me, unfortunately, but that's...
How long ago was that?
I believe that was 3 years ago. It was 3 years ago. But I'd be happy to pull that up and share it with your office to provide a summary of that.
And have you looked at what innovative features other cities are looking into, or who's doing it really well? Is there any city that comes to mind?
Well, you're putting me on the spot, council member, because I personally think that
We should probably figure that out.
I would have to
You don't
contend
need any
that
more studies. Go.
no, the city of Los Angeles is at the forefront of technology, but we are always evaluating the latest developments, and we are coordinating with other adjacent cities to help improve our coordination with their signals, as well as the county as a whole, so that we can better respond to area-wide issues.
It's a diplomatic of you, okay. All right, that's it.
Mr. Rue?
You said it launched today. How do I find the app on the phone? I've been trying to. Is it launched yet?
Yes, it launched this morning. It's available for iPhone and Android. It's called Go LA, so it should be available on the Apple Store.
It won't pop up.
It ain't yet.
I'll try it too, but it doesn't pop up on the website.
Oh, go to the website.
But the website, the link won't work.
I tried both.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
All right,
No.
so
Still doesn't work.
So for everyone listening, go LAAPP.org? .com. Okay.
Did it work?
But you have to
Okay.
fix, the website works, but in there it has the link to the Apple App Store, and that link doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we will contact our partner Xerox right after this meeting and
Right.
see if we can get that resolved as soon as possible.
And when you put in Go LA at the Apple App Store, everything else, including Metro's website, Metro Go LA pops up, but not ours yet. So maybe it's not just up yet. So
Okay.
And my question is, I'm sure, I mean, you just launched the app, but then I'm sure you have future. Do you have any future plans to integrate with 311 and all the other different apps that we have?
I'm trying to think of the different opportunities we have. I think the best one probably for the city's app is providing a opportunity for the public to relay issues that they see in the street, issues with traffic signals or other traffic control devices, as a way of getting, easy way of getting that information to the department.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that is forthcoming. Right now, the best way is to do that through our department's website.
Yeah. So, I mean, integration with other future apps, current and future apps. So hopefully you could look into that, think about that. And for, I guess, a website and app-wise, if we could try to make it as user-friendly as possible. Because, like, for example, I mean, I personally talked to our ITA regarding 311, which was super user-friendly, but with the recent upgrades, and it's, I think it was partially a goal of getting more information and data about our users, but by doing that, it just makes it much more complicated just to use 311. Before, you could report a pothole or bulky items in 15 seconds. Now it's much more difficult to use the 311 app. I mean, that's not your app, but I just want to say if we could focus on user-friendliness.
Absolutely.
But congratulations. I'm very excited about this and looking forward to
Thank you.
this and future growth of it.
And I should note, my communications director has downloaded the app and has sent me the link. It apparently doesn't work for elected officials, but everybody else.
Yeah, I just did it and it worked.
Yeah. See?
I'm proud to report that it's been fixed. So go LA.
Good work, Dan. Very well done.
app.com.
All right, so we will have your written report back in 60 days.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
Chair, we have one clarification, I believe, on item 2, I believe, resolution in regard to vehicle restricted speeds in Del Rey, that one more.
Technical amendment?
Technical amendment.
Okay, so let's reconsider item 2 for inclusion of the technical amendment, which adds, I believe, another street segment. Yes? Yes. So we'll reconsider that item. Without objection, that item is approved. And that concludes the meeting of the Transportation Committee. Thank you very much. Yes.